My name is Jillian Dial, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on exploring in-group favoritism and out-group bias. So the origins of this social theory, I want to go over that first, just so everybody kind of has like a general idea of what this means and who was the leading contributor to this social theory of in-group favoritism. So in-group favoritism was a social theory introduced in 1906 with leading contributions made by William Sumner. He is a very popular social theorist. He explored a bunch of different topics involving human behavior and specific idiosyncrasies. And his work and his studies on in-group favoritism led him to explore further this idea of ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism has to do with a narrow perspective and kind of getting a tunnel vision of our individual culture, our individual language, our individual preferences and beliefs that kind of leave you blindsided to the rest of the world and other perspectives that exist. Axelrod Hammond, who wrote on William Sumner's research and kind of elaborated further on his studies, he said that ethnocentrism is like seeing one's own group, the in-group, as virtuous and superior. And then obviously it's understandable why this is a problematic way of thinking and why it leads to discrimination, why this leads to xenophobia and other biases. It's a very interesting topic to explore. And so in-group favoritism has to do with the way that humans tend to treat people better based on behaviors or beliefs or language or ethnicity, appearances sometimes that mimic their own. And so those groups can vary. It's not just one thing, those groups kind of vary depending on the person, but in-group favoritism explores this idea of treating people differently when they are part of your group, whatever that group is, compared to people who you consider to be outside of your group. So some interesting studies on in-group favoritism. This study was actually one that I thought was very interesting. I came across it, and it was interesting to me because I work in the medical field. I'm a nurse assistant, and it's interesting how in-group favoritism and out-group bias does exist in the medical field. It does exist in healthcare, and that's something that I think deserves attention and something that we should really be thinking about and working on, and because it is something that exists. So a study was led by Olivia Morzenti and Stephanie Brunhofer. They conducted an experiment, a study involving 404 dental hygienists. And these dental hygienists, they were all women and they were all Caucasian, so of Northern European descent. And this was a two-step experiment. The first part of the experiment had to do with these women, with these female dental hygienists, and it kind of went into their background, explored their unique ethnicities, and kind of did a bit of a profile just to understand what their in-group would look like versus an out-group. The second step of this experiment had to do with a software program called Race IAT, and this is Implicit Association Test. And so the dental hygienists, they were asked to look over a series of photos, different faces of people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds, and they were asked to organize these photos in a way that would reflect any bias that they had, any bias that showed. And the results of this study were really interesting because they were quite staggering. Most of the respondents, by a long shot, 67.8% showed preference for Europeans, Northern Europeans, people Caucasian of that descent. over African Americans. 18.3 showed little to no preference between the two groups. I just think that that's a really interesting statistic, and it's very staggering, honestly, when you think about it. Like that is just really something to think about. Very interesting. And so in this case, you can really see the effects of in-group favoritism leading to out-group bias. And we can see how quite clearly the in-group was favored here. The group of people being tested, the dental hygienists, they were all Northern European, Caucasian, and there was a clear preference for Northern Europeans over people of African American descent. So I think that's interesting and something that I reflected on. This was another study, very interesting, because it's kind of unique to think about how we process in-group faces in comparison to out-group faces, and what kind of thinking leads to those distinctions, because it is such a quick reaction, it's not something that people think about, it's just a part of them is processing these things, and then you react before you've even planned on how you're going to react, and so I think that's interesting. So Wei Chen of the Department of Psychology, Science Division of New York University, and Malik Kassa at the College of Arts and Sciences, Khalifa University. So they profiled 109 Caucasian participants, and this study involved in-group faces and out-group faces in 2 stages. And so all of these participants in the group, they were of a certain ethnicity and a certain age. And so the first part of this study had to do, the group was shown faces that reflected their in-group, so other Caucasian faces. And then there were faces that did not reflect the in-group. And in this case, they were East Asian, people of East Asian descent. Those were an out-group. And then in the second part, they saw in-group, out-group based on age, actually, which was really interesting. So the first group was in keeping with these 109 Caucasian participants, people of the same age. And then in the second group, they were younger. I think they were faces of infants, which was clearly an out-group because these participants were adults. And the outcome of this study was very interesting because it reflected how processing of in-group faces and out-group faces, it really does differ. There's a difference there, and we can see clearly how those faces are processed in a way that is different. Social features such as race or age are incorporated to influence how out-group faces are processed efficiently. I just thought that was really interesting. And it was such a smart idea. I think I really was interested in this study. My own observations. I think it's interesting to reflect on generational divides when we think about in-group versus out-group. Why we feel the need to accentuate the differences between age groups, and generations, and sometimes pitting them against each other on social media. It can be lighthearted, but it's interesting, when you hear people talking about, oh, they're such a millennial, or they're so Gen Z, or whatever, and even those are out-groups and in-groups forming in themselves. The school cafeteria theory, some people have noticed that school cafeterias, no matter where you are, in the U.S. or wherever you are sometimes segregated unintentionally, but it's interesting to think about that. Why does that happen, and what leads to that in-group, out-group bias, maybe? In-group favoritism in regard to gender. We see a lot of groups of people who, you form bonds with people through kinship based on gender. A lot of our friend groups, I know mine, consist a lot of other females, of girls, and it's just interesting to think about that and how we establish our own in-group and our own out-group, even when we don't really think about it. And what does this mean, the reality of bias? In-group favoritism is not an inherently bad thing. That's something to kind of avoid when we're thinking about these social theories. It's a human behavior, and you don't want to cast a wide blanket over something and just say that it's bad. But this is a part of human nature, and it's a part of human behavior for a long time. So it's important to kind of look back. You can think about how evolutionarily it was important for people to form groups, and, back in a long, long time ago, you wouldn't have survived on your own. You had to form a group, and you had to have trust and community with people. So it is important to form groups, and it can be positive, and that can lead to survival, that can lead to growth, it can lead to friendship. But the danger there, the negative effects of exclusion. When you form a group, you're inherently forming an out-group as well. And that's leading to, thinking of another person or another group as other. Xenophobia is the fear of other cultures, the fear of other countries and people. And this is as a result of ethnocentrism, this idea that our own perspective is the center of all, which is not true. Stepping over the divide and broadening our perspective is important. It's important to not be pigeonholed in your own views, your own perspective. Chances are there are a lot of people who think differently than we do. These are my references that I used in this presentation, but I just think this is a really unique topic and something that I want to learn more about to continue to, because it is so relevant. We see it all the time. And so anyway, I just really enjoyed learning about this. Thank you.